Yeah, I figured it's going to take a few tries
This
to
meeting
kind
is being recorded.
of.
Notifying you so I don't do anything schemy. Yeah, Our Lady of Fatima. So let me do a screen share here real quick, and I'm gonna just real quick read the. There we go. Read the basic history of it, and then we'll kind of. And I'm actually just going to kind of skip to the Miracle of the Sun because there is a lot of history with. This is just from Wikipedia too, by the way, which I feel like does a pretty good job covering the basics with this. There was a lot of strange meetings leading up to the Miracle of the Sun, but they're all basically, children's telling the story years later. So it may be not as valuable from a skeptical point of view, but the Miracle of the Sun, just considering the fact that it was a larger event, I'll just read that part. After some newspapers reported that the Virgin Mary had promised a miracle for the last of her apparitions on the 13th of October, a huge crowd, possibly between 30 and 100,000, including reporters and photographers, gathered at Cova da Aria, probably butchering that. What happened then became known as the Miracle of the Sun. Various claims have been made as to what actually happened at the event. The 3 children who originally claimed to have seen Our Lady of Fatima reported seeing a panorama of visions during the event, including those of Jesus, Our Lady of Sorrows, Our Lady of Mount Carmel, and of Saint Joseph blessing the people. Father John de Marquis, an Italian Catholic priest and researcher, wrote several books on the subject, which included descriptions by witnesses who believed they had seen a miracle created by Mary, Mother of God. According to accounts, after a period of rain, dark clouds broke and the sun appeared as an opaque, spinning disk in the sky. It was said to be significantly duller than normal and to cast multicolored lights across the landscape, the people in the surrounding clouds. The sun was then reported to have careered toward the earth before zigzagging back to its normal position. Witnesses reported that their previously wet clothes had suddenly and completely dried, as well as the wet and muddy ground that had been previously soaked because of the rain that had been falling. However, not all witnesses reported seeing the sun dance. Some people only saw the radiant colors, and others, including some believers, saw nothing at all. The only known picture of the sun taken during the event does not show anything unusual, and I'll show that here in just a second. No unusual phenomena of the sun was observed by scientists at the time. Skeptics have offered alternative explanations that include psychological suggestibility of the witnesses, temporary retinal distortion caused by staring at the intense light of the sun, and optical effects caused by natural meteorological phenomena. So I guess we can leave it at that. And that's a picture. I don't know, did you see this picture before? I thought this was pretty cool.
Yeah, I've seen that picture.
Okay. Yeah, so obviously, like, I'm not a Catholic,
Right.
and you're
Neither
not
am I.
right.
Quite opposed to Catholicism.
Right. However, this seems to be a pretty public miracle to me. When I read about this, it reminds me of the feeding of the 5,000, or just another massive miracle that's that was very public. So, anyways, I just read the intro. What are your thoughts on this?
So, there's 2 interesting kind of points that I found. It was children that were kind of stating this event would happen, and they had actually stated, I think, on a previous occasion that it would happen, and it didn't. So that they kind of were like, second time's the try, and it worked out the second time. I just thought it was very interesting that it was children leading said revelations from Mary, because I just find that an interesting comparison or connection between this miracle and kind of since to a degree I'm not going to say it was like psychosomatic, like psychosis or a mass hypnosis, but it definitely is out of the ordinary, kind of like what the Salem trials. It was children that made the accusations. I just thought it was an interesting comparison of a large end phenomenon that children kind of led, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. And I think there's, again, I don't remember all of the details, but I know that the meetings with the lady who was appearing to him started out with just the children, and then there was increasingly larger numbers of crowds that gathered. And I believe that during these apparitions, the crowds themselves, if I recall correctly, they couldn't actually see anything, but they were going on what the children had reported. So
Right,
um,
exactly.
but you know,
It's not to discredit the event. It just I would thought it was interesting that children were the messengers, for lack of better words.
it is, and it's also interesting that everybody opposed them, and they refused to recant. I mean, their mother treated them very harshly for it. Their priest and bishop basically told them that they were lying. That the mayor even kidnapped them and threatened them with, I don't even know what, threatened to jail them or whatever, if they, if they wouldn't. He wanted for them to disclose the secrets to him, and they wouldn't do it. But so they definitely seemed like they were very headstrong in it too. And I believe, let's see, I believe Jacinta, and I can't remember the boy's name, but I believe the boy died young, if I recall correctly, like as an early teen.
I didn't read that far into it. I didn't realize. I kind of just stuck to the event itself and not kind of before or after. So I didn't know that one of them died.
Yeah, he died. So Sister Lucia, I want to say Sister Lucia and her other sister, both wound up becoming nuns because of it. So from the standpoint of believability, I'm kind of I'm definitely inclined to believe the children in their claims to have experienced something. It's very difficult for me to say that they were making up the earlier apparitions just kind of based on all of that. Not to say
Right,
that
it's a long hoax to be so committed to.
right. And then this is almost like for me what makes it even more obvious in a sense, or that it seems to be obvious, is that these children, like the lady told these children, tell everybody to come back on this day and I'm going to give them a miracle. This is paraphrasing, but she said, I'm going to show you who I am and prove who I am. And she said, okay. So she rallied all these people who were very interested already, because this had been an ongoing apparition at this point. And so the crowd that comes out, most estimates that I've heard have said that it was a crowd of 60 to 80,000, a massive crowd.
Yeah,
And
and go
most
ahead.
of them seem to have seen something, of this, what was being described.
Right, and there was I think either a warship or a fishing boat off the coast that supposedly reported seeing something and not knowing that there was a correlation.
Okay, see, that I didn't know. I hadn't heard that.
Yeah, so like there is supposedly correlated with eyewitness testimony. So
A
I
secondary
cannot
witness.
refute the fact that something did happen. I would agree with that. The biggest thing that I have to argue against it being a quote unquote miracle is the heaviness on the not Calvinistic, the Catholicistic. Is that a word? Catholicistic? The whole principle that Mary was going to be doing something.
Mm-hmm.
I think that was too convenient to reinforce the idea of Mary's divinity, which doesn't exist in Scripture.
Yeah, it's that in and of itself seems to make it really difficult for a Protestant to deal with,
I
because
think in the sense that it was a religious miracle per se.
what is that?
I would say I would agree. I'm agreeing with you in the perspective of a religious miracle. Like it could have been, a phenomenon that's coincided with these children's statement, which in itself could be argued a miracle that they were able to predict an event. Oh, this day, this something will happen, and it does. But
Mm-hmm.
I would not say Mary did this.
Okay, so it, and again, I'm not I'm not arguing strongly that this is a miracle. What I say is that it seems on the face like it's
Oh,
difficult to
absolutely.
deny that it is. But I don't really have a dog in the fight in that way. But so you'd be saying that you agree that it was something divine happening, but you're saying you don't think it was Mary?
Definitely not Mary. I wouldn't even say divine,
Okay.
because I mean, I don't rule it out. However, I think there's other possibilities that haven't been considered, in the sense of it was in the middle of World War One or nearing the end, since it was 1917. I guess depends which side you're on, time frame. But so they were experimenting with gases. They were experimenting with explosives that could technically correlate to some kind of event, if a big explosion of some kind, and no one else knew what was going on. It happened to coincide with the children's story. That's just, I'm allowing for the possibility of. Why I brought up Salem in the beginning was because there's some research out to suggest the idea that prior to the trials of Salem and the witch hunt, that the wheat harvest had been contaminated with a fungus, which they didn't know of. They made bread, they ate it, and supposedly that specific kind of fungus equates to hallucinogenic. So supposedly the entire town was tripping, for lack of better words. That's why they were off on this witch hunt. So if that is true in that case, then I think it allows a possibility that there is mass, like, hypnosis or psychosis in this, and no one possibly was aware of it. And I think with herd mentality as well as mob mentality, I think I would like to know how many people didn't see anything, and in order to seem wholly like everyone else, claim to have. Convince
Yeah.
themselves they witnessed something as well. Maybe a few people did, but it wasn't everyone. If 60,000 people were there, not everyone saw something.
Yeah, my understanding is that most people saw something. I believe that people who said that they didn't experience anything were in the minority. I think that the group that stands out the most are the atheistic press that showed up, and people who basically thought the children were lying, and they saw the miracle as reported, with the the sun spinning and dancing and zigzagging and all of that. And I've thought. See, here's the thing. And I'll get okay. Before I get to the point I was going to bring up, I think that the difficulty with hallucination, be it drug induced or any form really, is that shared hallucinations don't happen really. I mean, it's
true. I did background research into that, and I agree with that point.
And what we have, we definitely don't have a hallucination shared by everybody, but if anything, we seem to have different variants of, or a very similar hallucination shared by large groups of people, which just kind of seems to undermine the idea of hallucination, which is a very personal experience to begin with. And the reason why I think that it's important why we handle this evidence the way we do is because this type of miracle for me is very reminiscent to the types of discussions that we have in apologetics regarding the resurrection of Jesus. Because what Christianity is essentially a faith based on miracles that took place in history, which there is good reason, there is good evidence to believe in, that to the extent that a divine miracle is the best explanation, for instance, for the empty tomb. As some people, like I think Mike Lycona, Sean McDowell, and some others do a really good job of explaining that. And this same concept of hallucination obviously comes into play in that arena also, because skeptics, if they're going to admit an empty tomb, which more and more skeptical scholars are, it's pretty much the A missing body is probably a majority view among scholars at this point, then one of the only explanations that they would have is hallucination. But yet hallucination across multiple people it has just been too difficult to even stand up to any scrutiny. So so I think for that reason, because the testimony of these people who saw Jesus risen from the dead carries so much weight, because several of them saw it and they can't all be hallucinating the same way. Because of that same line of thinking, that makes it very difficult for me as a non-Catholic to explain this as some psychological phenomenon for the same reasons.
True. But I would just be very cautious and skeptical to associate the miracle of Jesus' resurrection with this kind of event. Because I think a lot of times, especially it was 1917, I mean, technology was non-existent in the sense that we know today with manipulation and other factors like that. So I'm not saying these people didn't see something. I just definitely don't see a correlation between necessarily God and this, because God never was mentioned really as in the forefront of this by the children or the witnesses. It was definitely Mary, or the Miracle of Fatima was associated with the saint of that region. I just don't think, if it was a divine action of God, that he would do anything that would reinforce the separation of his deity. No, if it was Jesus, maybe. If it was the Holy Spirit, maybe. But to add Mary into this, I mean, that seems counterintuitive to what the Lord would actually do, since he himself never gave Mary divinity.
Unless Mary really is active in the heavens.
True.
Is that possible?
I don't see the evidence in Scripture, because
blessed art thou among women. I mean, it's really not nearly as strong as the Catholics.
The only material
there's some blessings, but not like they make it out to seem like.
Right, and from my research in it, the only credible evidence that they have is that Mary kind of gives Jesus the go ahead with his first miracle at the wedding, with the production of better wine. But that could just like there's been a lot of this kind of, it will add to my point, so I'm not trying to deviate or anything. But there's been research that's changing our perspective of one of the 10 commandments, which is do not take the Lord's name in vain. For the better half of this century, it's been associated with don't using the Lord's name in vain, such as profanity, any kind of GD or sacrilegic comment. In reality, researchers and theologians have kind of been coming to the conclusion that it was, don't take the covenant of being a Christian in vain. Don't become a Christian and do deeds that would make a non-follower look at you and be like, well, I don't want to be a Christian if this is what it is. So if our understanding and deciphering of the ancient text has changed now, going back to the whole Mary telling Jesus to go ahead with that miracle, it merely could be like she was accepting, he was no longer her child, and he was going to go off and venture kind of the world without her. That could have been kind of what it was. It was her acceptance. She had known this day was coming, and it was kind of her acceptance verbally to him. That's, just a potential translation variation, which I think would strengthen the argument that she has no divinity, other than she's as human as everyone else, and she just happened to be the chosen individual in order to bring Christ in a way that we can understand, in the sense of being, again, born of a virgin, being a human like us. But I wouldn't necessarily, no person that's been specifically chosen by God in order to reveal his majesty to the world has never thus been considered divine themselves. Mary is the only one that the Catholic Church has used to strengthen such argument.
Yeah, one thing is, I do think that you're right. I don't think that there's a lot of explicit teaching about Mary at all in the way that they believe about her in the Bible. But I also don't think that they would try to argue it from the Bible. I think that their their reasoning on this would be the same tradition that produced the scriptures or produced the authoritative acceptance of the scriptures also produced a veneration of Mary, which there is not to the degree, you know, there isn't rosaries to Mary in ancient Christianity, but there is Marian veneration at a pretty early date. Now, not that she's divine, and I don't even think Catholics today would use the word divine when speaking of her, but there is early what would you say, like preeminence of Mary, you know, just lifting her up, so to speak. And then it seems like, and again, because we're talking about history, you know, something 1700, 1800 years ago, it's very difficult to say for sure. But it seems like, you know, as the concept of the virgin, well, not just the virgin birth, but the Immaculate Conception became more popular a few centuries later, that this took on more of a dogmatic role. So, and I understand where you're coming from if we're going to look at it just from scripture also. My problem is, and I don't even know if it's not, I mean, I guess it is a problem in the sense that I feel like we have to deal with miracles if we're going to be intellectually honest. So my problem is that the Protestants say that Mary does not have a special status in the heavens today. The Catholics say that she does. This seems to be a piece of evidence for their point of view. And there doesn't seem to be anything to counter that from the Protestant point of view. I think that's why this is just so surprising to me.
I think there is potential merit that, you know, the saints that we would consider the 12 apostles and even Mary do have a status in heaven. No, not even on a level that would be considered divine, but you know, they were the forefathers, for lack of a better word, of the Christian faith. Like, you know, Christ told Peter he'd be the rock in which the foundation of the church would be built on. And who is it that's supposed to meet us at heaven's gate? Is it Saint
Peter, isn't it?
I think so, and I believe that's scriptural to a degree. And I'm a little rusty on that. So if it is, we'll go on that presumption for the argument's sake. If that is, then that's, I would say, be an example of idea that God does give like a responsibility or a class system in heaven, you know, based on the close relationship they had with, you know, Jesus and God, you know, their commitment to the faith. Doesn't make them more of a Christian, but I think it does, just like it says, you know, you'll be rewarded in heaven, you know, jewels in your crown. But I think it's kind of a stretch. I think there is an argument there, but I think it'd have to be well argued.
So what do you think about the idea that you brought up the verse in Matthew where Peter's confession of Christ spurs Christ to say, you are Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not prevail against it. The verse that Catholics kind of take to understand that, you know, Peter being the first pope. And because what did Jesus say to Peter right after that? Whatever you bind on heaven, or I'm sorry, whatever you bind on earth will have been bound in heaven. Whatever you loose on earth will have been loosed in heaven. Which that to me, the fact that, you know, people distinguish about, you know, Petra and Petros, you know, big rock and little rock, but the fact that he goes on to say, therefore, whatever you say, I'm going to go along with in heaven, that seems to at least hint at like a Petrine authority, to change things. So, because that's what he's saying, you can change things, and I'll agree with you. So I have this idea in my head. It's not something that I can prove scripturally, because it's just something that I can look at scripture and history and try to make sense of. But if if Jesus did make this promise to Peter, and if that did give special authority to the Church of Rome, as the early church seemed to recognize, Rome had a special authority, not necessarily, the papacy as understood today, far from it, but that Rome did have a special authority as the head of the church. And if that means that Jesus is going to follow them no matter what, because you got to remember, this is a comparison between a husband and a wife, no matter how bad, and so we're the wife, or the church is the wife, right? No matter how bad the wife screws up, the husband isn't going to leave. The husband stays there. So even if that's the case, if the church goes off the rails, which I think the Catholic Church has gone off the rails in a couple different ways, then that marriage, so to speak, would still stand. Now, if we follow this line of thinking, then that would mean obviously that the Catholic Church is not, even if they are the chosen, or not necessarily chosen, but the sanctioned, institutionalized Church of God on earth, that still wouldn't mean that they were infallible, I don't think. In which case I could still understand how Protestants would still be part of the true Church of Christ. And that's just one line of thinking that I have of why it's so easy to say that they're wrong about Mary until she shows up and makes the sun move. It's like, what else could you ask for? Like, or what further miracle could there be? Seriously. So that's kind of why I think that maybe just granting the miracle and granting the proof that the Catholic Church, but look at Israel. Israel, they went into complete idolatry, but they were still the people of God.
Right.
And I think that we may be looking at a similar history here with the Catholic Church, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we have to be a part of it, because I think they're off in the weeds right now.
Right. I mean, I remember in Bible class as a kid, we were reading about, the cycle of the people of Israel, especially when they exited Egypt. It was see God, follow God, forget God, make new God. God punishes them, basically, and it was just a repetitive cycle. And I remember asking the question, I was like, how could they be so stupid? Like, they saw God.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if it was Bible class or like Sunday school, and the teacher basically goes, well, consider it in this perspective that it's a description of your daily walk.
Mm-hmm.
And it really humbled me and made me be like, oh, okay, that makes me not be so judgmental, because we do it daily when they did it, yearly per se. But going so I do think kind of adds to, going back to what you said about with Peter, with what Christ said to him after the rock statement, because Christ even states that he came down to change the kind of the status quo of the Pharisees, because they had taken what God had given them and weaponized it, or became too or authoritative to the direct aspect of the words, not the meaning. So maybe Christ was telling Peter, continue the work I started, shatter the bond of ignorance per se. I will be with you. Obviously, Peter is the one who denied Christ 3 times. So he stumbled hugely and he walked with Christ. So maybe that commitment was, I will never forsake you, because I understand that, you're going to stumble. And it could be, just scrape your toe, you fall down the side of the mountain, but the walk of the Christian isn't staying on the path perfectly in the argument, but understand that we are going to fall and stumble, and we got to get back on the path. Like, we stay the course rather than actually follow verbatim the footsteps. And again, it doesn't mean it's okay to stumble. It just God understands that that's the case. That's why we need him, because it's not an easy walk. That's what I understand it as, rather than kind of, I'll follow. I'm not saying that's what he said, but like, I think that's more of Christ saying, I'm not going to forsake you when you make a mistake or you screw up, versus that you kind of giving Peter the reins of you're the voice. I think it was a caution too, if that makes sense. Because pastors are told, you know, they, or husbands too, you know, the shortcomings and the sins of the wife and the family aren't going to be questioned. The wife's not going to be questioned. The husband will. He holds the responsibility of the family unit. So I think pastors are the same thing, but there's a very big warning on that, if that makes sense.
Okay.
That's my understanding.
I would also be interested in taking a look at that book, Miracles by Craig Keener, Dr. Craig Keener. That was the gentleman in the video that I sent you yesterday. He's written.
Yeah, they were mentioning it was about to drop in the video, is what they were saying.
Yeah. I think that would be worth looking at as well, because you don't hear about miracles very often today. And then when you hear from people like Craig Keener and others also, I mean, there's been other well-respected professionals that seem to be quite vocal about the number of these that actually take place that people don't hear about. That actually makes me wonder just how much this is actually happening, because he mentioned something. It was like hundreds of millions. This was all in surveys, but hundreds of millions of people that had reported directly seeing some type of miracle or experiencing some type of miracle. So contrary, as he says, contrary to Kant's assertion that miracles are not a part of human experience, it definitely seems like if we take humanity as a whole, they definitely are.
Right. And I would say, to argue the point that miracles don't exist today, it is to finite a infinite God. You're telling you're almost saying you can dictate what happens today, in a sense, when you're limiting God's power. I think I absolutely believe they happen, but I think that if they do happen, they happen with humility and to glorify God, or bring someone or a group of people to God. That, like, he may not again come out in the clouds with this, or hang right on the wall, literally, kind of like what I think we assume based off scripture. But I definitely don't think it would deviate in any way from bring glory directly to God. I don't think it would stage it like from Mary to Christ to God. Like, it does say he's a jealous God. He doesn't have an obligation to share anything. So that's my hesitation of any time I hear about a miracle, is who is being given the credit kind of immediately. Like, you can't just be like, oh, God gets credit because he's at the, you know, he's part of the circle, but we're gonna say Mary did this one. I just don't think that has very much merit. So I think miracles do happen. I think we just are so if this group of people hadn't been not cathartic, Catholic, would the event happen still, and would the story have changed as to the origin of the miracle? Does that make sense? Maybe
It does, because Portugal was a particularly Catholic and spiritual country at the time,
right,
from what I've been told anyways.
yes. I mean, and again, it was the World War I was going on during this time. So obviously the morale of people wasn't very good. I mean, they didn't want this war going on. That's even what the miracle says, is Mary came and said, you know, repent and the war will be over. Don't, and the war will progress. So for it to be, again, Mary based, and the being referred to the World War, I just think it's too coincidental.
Yeah, she did get the date. This is again just from what I've read, but Lucinda did get the date of the end of World War I wrong. I believe she was off by a year, possibly. But it is, I do find it interesting that the warning of, if the people don't repent, then another war will break out worse than this one. I do find it pretty interesting that that was said back in 1913, I believe this was.
True,
Maybe
but
17. I think it's 13.
I was 17.
17. Okay. Yeah,
But
13 was
at the
the
same time,
communist revolution.
I think that statement can be, I would consider a Barnum statement, because war was actually nothing new. I think, especially in the second half of the 20th century, and now that we're in first quarter of the 21st century, we're almost done with the quarter. I think we have become too. Granted, I'm not speaking for the time of this happened, but I think the society, at least in the United States or the Western world, is very comfortable. We don't see war on a daily basis. We sure as don't, at least in the United States. I've never seen war from a foreign body on home turf. So I think our understanding is different, just like maybe it was that for them at the time. They're right. I don't know what the history of Portugal was when it came to, the turn of the century and when it came to wars. But to say that don't do bad things will happen is kind of a Barnum statement. Wars always were going on.
Well, so I think that if you look at history, the two world wars are the biggest, definitely the largest wars. And there hasn't been anything like them.
In which regard?
Just in size of, in pretty much any regard. The number of nations involved, the number of fronts, the size of the fronts, the number of deaths. World Wars I and II were the largest, bloodiest wars in history. So,
true.
To be within one of them, nearly at the end of it, and to say another one worse than this is going to break out in the near future, that seems to be something very risky to say. That would be like me saying that during COVID, and a lot of people do say stuff like this, that another pandemic is going to break out much worse than this one. Okay, now that's a very easy thing to say, but really, what are the chances that that's going to happen within like 10 years? Unless it's planned from the top, it's not very high.
Right.
So I think that along those same lines, it's one of those things that it's very easy to be wrong about. There's going to be another war worse than this one. This is the worst one we've ever seen. So
I think that goes to perspective, because World War II, or even World War I and World War II, was not devastating to the United States when it came to the people, the citizens, not excluding the soldiers, but to the citizens. They really didn't suffer. If you go to England, they did during the bombings and the rationings. So they experienced. They would argue that World War I and World War II for them was a lot harder than America would say, because we were so set away from it. We had to come to the war. But to argue that the World War I and World War II were the largest wars, I think it's easy to say, but easy also to break apart, because the Battle of Red Cliff, which was military engagement in China. I'm not going to act smart and be like during the Han Dynasty, because I have zero idea off the top of my head when it occurred.
I think you're right. I think it was the Han Dynasty. Well, I think it was when the Han Dynasty took over. I think that was the beginning of everything.
And so the Battle of Red Cliff was the largest naval battle still to this day on the number of actual vessels. And I think you could even argue by water displacement, because it had so many. Yes, obviously our carriers and our battleships have a larger displacement per ship, but we don't actually have that many. Yes, we could have 20 carriers that displace a lot of water, but they're they are super weapons. But in the Battle of Red Cliff, you have 10,000, small vessels. It actually does displace more water in the large scale. So the only thing is, I think on perspective, there will always be someone who will say the next engagement, the next war, was more brutal than the last, depending where they were in regards to that war.
But if somebody would have said that in the middle of Red Cliff, that there will be another war like this, but worse, they would have been wrong.
That's a fair point. So there has to be a cap, I guess, technically.
So I think that you're right. Random, given enough time, huge wars will happen. They will. Right. But I think it's just the fact that two of them within such a short period of time, and that it seems to have been called like that. Now, however, I'm not 100% sure when Lucinda shared these details. You know, I don't know if she shared all of this as a kid. I know that some of this information came out as she wrote books as an adult. So although I would never accuse a nun of, you know, embellishing or anything like that, you know, I don't know for certain if she said all of this as a kid. And I'm sure not trying to say that this is 100%, reliable information, but it, using the brain that God gave me, it just seems, it's very impressive. That's all that I'm saying. So
I agree. We weren't there, and we can't say with certainty that it didn't happen. I would just go as far as to say that I would not say, from my personal belief, that it was a religious miracle.
right, because let's for clarity, there was in the book of Acts, there was the girl who had a demon, a spirit of divination, you know, and she was given special abilities, you know, because of the spirit. I mean, these things do happen. We know that Paul says that Satan's servants masquerade as angels of righteousness. So, you know, we know that we do have to discern. So yeah, just put that out there. You know, that's definitely why we want to be careful about everything. I
agree, and I'm not going to say it, but if the divinity of Mary in the Catholic religion is sacrilegious and of the devil, it would only then go to make sense that an event like this would only strengthen the belief in Mary and almost the taking to a degree the divinity of God away.
Yeah, I think that's actually how a lot of fundamentalists and conservative evangelicals handle this, just because it is difficult to discount the miraculous appearance of it. But they say that the attention called for being given to Mary is basically just attention being called away from Jesus is kind of the thinking there, and they think that Satan would be more than happy to facilitate that distraction. So, you know, they do have their own understanding of this. This is just, I guess, to try to see what makes the most sense.
Right, and I think it's hard to make a true judgment call. Obviously, we weren't there, and we don't know how we would react had we seen that. But I think with the information available, I think my concrete final decision, not that it is final, it always will change. But again, the fact that they are enforcing Mary as being a divine individual, being able to produce miracles or be a part of miracles like this, I'm very skeptical. I just don't see evidence elsewhere of that argument being able to be made.
Do you think you would feel differently if you had seen it for yourself?
I think I would be able to say with certainty that the event happened. But
as far as where to place it theologically, do you think seeing the event itself would be persuading to you theologically?
Not to the argument that they're making, because I 100% agree with miracles, and I don't try to rate them per se. I'm not, oh, that's a small miracle, that's a big miracle, because then intrinsically, if it is a miracle, it has no scale. It is God's divinity over, you know, the simple. I mean, you could argue the simple of the power of prayer is a miracle. You know, some people do have, you know, prayer warriors that can make things work in the favor of our understanding, so long as they obviously correlate with God's plan and timing. I think it's just easy, because someone once wrote, you know, what's the point of praying? And the argument was because sometimes God's like, because I wrote in your life, you know, just ask. No, I don't have a plan per se for this, but if I can reinforce your faith in me by answering a prayer that doesn't have a catastrophic effect on the world, like the butterfly effect, because I do think that because prophecies exist, that there is a rigid line in human events that cannot change. So I think there micro events can happen, such as miracles, that only strengthen the faith in God, but don't deviate from the largest plan.
Okay.
I think, just like, 'cause I think it's a very deep topic to talk about, but how everything that happens goes to the hands of the God. He is in control of everything, but there has to be an understanding that he has the ability to, and he does if he so wants. And I can't say when he does, when he doesn't, if he does, if he doesn't. But I would say to a degree, he has a hands-off practice, because if he didn't, if he micromanaged so much, then I think the idea of free will would be removed.
So you're saying he allows for the laws of nature except for instances of the miraculous? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I think I would say that.
Okay.
Again, I don't think he's making. He's obviously, he never puts sin in your way. He gives you the strength to overcome the sin that's in your path. But I think he also has to let you sin. He can't protect you from your own choices.
Okay. I wanted to look briefly at Our Lady of Lourdes also, not necessarily the event, but just what's happened since then. Are you familiar with this at all? The healings of Lourdes?
Lourdes,
Yeah.
I'm vaguely familiar. It definitely, I've read about it, but it's probably
Okay.
been a while.
I can, let me bring up the Wikipedia here.
Sorry, give me just a moment. I'm going to use the restroom. I just came
Yeah,
from the
go
gym.
ahead. I'll pull this up while you're going.
Perfect. All right, sorry about that.
Yeah, no worries. I just briefly read up on this a little bit. So Bernadette was the name of this lady. This was in the middle 1800s. She had an apparition, Lourdes, Spain, or France, I believe this would be, right? Lourdes, that's in France, I believe. Yeah, Lourdes, France. So 1850s, she has an apparition. I believe she's also a child of the Virgin Mary, and she seems to undergo some type of trance states, something like that, unable to make the sign of the cross. And for whatever reason, she's told to start digging into the ground. She starts digging, everybody can't figure out why, and it comes up, or it turns out that she digs down to a spring of fresh water that's still there today. So that's kind of surprising to start with, I think. And again, another weird thing about this vision is you look at the reports, and she's told, by the lady showing up, I am the Immaculate Conception. So these visions just get right into Marian theology. So it is kind of alarming in that way. The surprising thing about Lourdes, though, is that, and this isn't just Lourdes, this is the Catholic Church in general. And again, the only reason I keep coming back to the Catholic Church is because they dedicate so much time to documenting these miracles, and there seems to be so many of them there. Like, there's a lot of miracles or apparent miracles like this within history, but they have a medical review board in Lourdes, because there's still people going to this fountain all the time. People report all types of healings, from what I hear. And they have a scientific board whose job it is to rule out anything that can be explained scientifically or medically in any way. And they actually do this for all reported miracles, you know. So and most of them they rule against it. It's kind of counterintuitive that that they don't let as many in as you might expect. I mean, most of the people, for instance, only 70 of these people have been confirmed, not confirmed miracles, because the doctors can't say that they're miracles, but the doctors say that there is no scientific explanation whatsoever for the events that took place of how these people recovered from their illnesses. So is that anything you want to say about that? I want to mention one in particular, but anything you want to say about that so far?
Oh, is that due to like the healing properties of the spring?
I think they would say that it's due to the healing properties of God, but yeah, that they would say that that they go down into the water, and I think they would say that God heals them through the water. But yeah,
Right, because the water's blessed, you know.
Yeah,
it is
the water. Yeah, it's
okay.
it's sacred water. Yeah.
I mean, I've thought about like this answer actually for a while on even the miracles of Jesus. I think it's just an interesting question to be, did it happen with true divine power, or did it happen by authority and control of our natural environment? I think they both, I give credit both to God, but what if, you know, God is simpler than we think, and he allows the earth that he created to heal us? So maybe there is an actual argument that the water has certain minerals or bacterium that can cure certain ailments. You know, it is understood that all ailments are due to a deficiency in minerals and minerals and vitamins. So I think it could be either or. I think, you know, God could just be like, you know, snap the fingers, you're healed, or just like the woman that touched her Jesus' robe, the faith in it healed them, but it was still God's divine power. I just don't think it works. It's only one way. I think it could be a multitude of facets that God uses to create miracles, if that makes sense.
Okay. It does seem pretty interesting that she would find a spring at the seemingly random place where she started digging.
I would just be skeptical historically. Like maybe it was a tiny little spring and she just dug more and like broke through the spring, like something was keeping it back. You know, it could be like that in a degree. But again, I think it's hard since it was the 1850s. I would just be skeptical in the idea of the facts, how embellished or non-embellished they are.
Okay, let's look at, let me see here. I want to look at a couple healings in particular here. This is from a doctor who's actually on the committee in Lourdes. And this is from the BBC.com, who's, of course, they are by no means cheerleaders for miracles. So I thought it was kind of interesting to hear their take on this. So here we go. The most recent one was a lady with extremely high blood pressure who had a benign tumor on her adrenal gland that was secreting adrenaline and keeping her blood pressure very high, and she felt suddenly well. Oh, no, I'm sorry, this is the one I was looking for. The gentleman from Italy who had a tumor on his pelvis, and although you can see the destruction of the pelvic bone on x-rays, which are available for the public to view in Lourdes, the bone actually regrew both in the pelvis and the femur in an anatomically correct way that would be hard to explain. So for me, that's the x-rays and medical records are the best type of evidence for me. So That's why for Lourdes, I
I
find that
agree with
particularly interesting.
when it's like that, that's unexplainable, like it's not naturally human to occur. I agree. There was a case that I was listening to after the video you sent me about miracles, and I don't know the details, but basically an individual had lost most of the lower intestines, and kind of was dying. The
Hmm.
miracle occurred, and they reevaluated him, and the majority of it had grown back. And it's not possible. It can expand, like the diameter of your intestines can change, but they can't actually elongate naturally, if
Hmm.
they're removed. So I mean, there are pure examples of miracles, 100%. I think my way to discern, I guess, is where is the credit being given. If it's going to Mary, or trying to make an individual become a saint, I would say that the miracle may have occurred, but it's being credited it all in the wrong way.
Okay. Okay.
Um, but at the same time, say again the premise that Mary isn't divine in any way, and it is, Satan's use of distraction. It still doesn't take away the fact that a miracle happened, and what the devil means for evil, God means for good. The Lord can at 100% use these misrepresentations of his actions in order to still make people follow him. No, because a miracle happened. It was Mary. They believe, and then they start doing their own digging and research into, their relationship with Christ, and they realize, okay, it's Christ that I follow and God that I have my, my obedience to, not Mary. So I just will not give credit to the fact that Catholics will associate Mary with any kind of divine power. That I think that's just kind of maybe it's kind of a petty perspective on all miracles, but I just think it's a very red flag for me when the miracle occurs, and again Mary's been given credit.
True. True. However, I would also say that if giving Mary credit is the problem for accepting a miracle, then I would say that creates, so that means that there's problems then with Our Lady of Fatima, Our Lady of Lourdes, problems in the sense that we have to explain it in some other way. And from the standpoint of Occam's razor, which I'm sure you're familiar with, the one thing that we could change our stance on that would make everything else fall into place would be accepting the activity of Mary. Because
Right.
if we don't accept the activity of Mary today, and I'm not going to say divinity, but if we don't accept the activity of Mary today, or the activity of Mary at all, so to speak, then, like I just said, that we there's a lot of things to answer for. If we do accept the activity of Mary today, all of these empirical things fall into place, or they have an explanation. And the thing that I think we're left with at that point is how do we make sense of that from the way that we understand our faith? So I guess I'm asking, I don't think we necessarily have to become Roman Catholic to accept the fact that maybe Mary's active today. I think that's kind of the area that I'm trying to open up here.
I mean, my stance is still against any power that Mary has no more authority or activity in scripture or in daily life, in my book, or in my opinion. However, I think regardless of Mary, I don't disregard the miracle from occurring, because just like who was it? The Elijah, when he called out the prophets of Baal to smite the offering, and then he wets his, he soaks his with wood, and God comes in and like burns the stones as well.
Mm-hmm.
So obviously he is giving credit to the Lord, because that's what happened. What if a tertiary party hears of this activity and changes the narrative unknowingly or intentional, and starts spreading, so everyone can look back and be like, yeah, the event happened. I think you have to discern who did it. And I think that's what the Catholics are doing, is they're changing who had done the miracle per se, or where the miracle came from, because I don't doubt the idea of control that the Catholic Church has had for, you know, 5, 6, 700 years. I mean, they have been absolutely what's the word I'm looking like, they for the longest time, no one dared stand up against the church, except like Henry VIII. That's a different argument for a different day. So I don't doubt that they could manipulate an event in order to enforce their narrative.
I don't either, but I don't think that the events that we're looking at today, they would have the ability to manipulate.
They could.
I don't think Lourdes and Fatima, I don't think the Catholic Church would be able to. I don't see how they would have manipulated that in their favor, anyways.
They could manipulate it how it was retold, or the narrative of the facts. I just think,
but the people who saw it themselves are the ones telling the story, and the Catholic Church actually refused it for years. Yeah. Anyways, go ahead though.
I just for me it's just hard to accept any miracle that is associated with Mary not to be a miracle. I won't take it away. I just take away from, again, the origin of the miracle, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think so. It's probably safe to say that it's either from Mary or from some either scheming demon playing tricks, or the devil himself, something like that. Do you think there's another option, or would you say it's one of those?
I would still say it's from the Lord, and because of the narrative of the Catholic Church, they spun it to be Mary, because again, they need the idea for people to believe that Mary has some kind of control or power. It just seems very likely in the understanding of mass manipulation and control. Wherever you see a miracle, there could have been a board meeting. They're like, again, send this out to everyone. Wherever you see a miracle, spin it to make it to be Mary. And it doesn't mean that the people themselves are under the scheme, but if, again, they're being preached to about Mary so hard, maybe their first initial, like, muscle memory is to give credit to Mary, when in reality, Mary had nothing to do with it. Is just where I'm kind of associating Mary's credit to so many miracles.
So are you saying that the Catholic Church exercised information control after the event to say that it was actually Mary that you saw and not whoever else you thought you saw? Or are you saying that the Catholic Church kind of indoctrinated these people so much, so to speak, that when they did have a religious experience, they saw Mary because of all of their expectations?
I would agree with the second one. Again, I mean, for however long the Catholic Church had the law that the scriptures had to be in Latin and no one could read, let alone read Latin, that shows that they had ultimate control of the narrative.
Yeah, you're right. They didn't want. Yeah, you're right. They didn't want the common people understanding the narrative at all.
That an organization with that level of hunger for power would ultimately randomly, catastrophically change its narrative in control and power just doesn't seem to be the case. Yes,
yeah.
When the Bible was in Latin, that was the Dark Ages, and obviously these events are happening in the turn of the 19th and 20th century. So obviously the same people in power aren't the same people today or at that time,
right.
But it has always been kind of the narrative of the church to what's the word I'm looking for? To carry on the beliefs and practices of the Pope. I mean, when Julius Caesar, or no, not Julius Caesar, but Nero was in power, the Christians were being executed and what's the word I'm looking for? Not perpetrated, but
persecuted.
Persecuted. Mm-hmm. But then you turn a few hundred years later, with the St. Patty's Day and the idea that the Roman Church went into Scotland and Ireland to the Celts and annihilated that religious group because they saw them as a threat. So on one hand, we have an episode of Christians being persecuted, and then in another, we have them being the persecutors.
Right. It seems like they've taken both sides of that throughout history.
Right. And I'm just saying, I think some credit needs to be given to where like the power is. With the Catholic Church, it's the Pope. So kind of, especially back in the day, as long as whatever the Pope said, kind of people went along with, or the narrative that he wanted to enforce.
Yeah. And I'm not exactly holding the Catholic Church in a degree of special trustworthiness, certainly. I think in these two specific instances, well, in the situation with Fatima, I think that the persistence of the children, which we've already discussed, that basically earns my trust, in the sense that I don't think that is a fabrication of the Catholic Church, because the Catholic Church was basically saying these children were lying and ordering them to stop saying it for years, and they kept doing it. So now in the case of Our Lady of Lourdes, I'm actually not exactly sure what all the Catholic Church has said or done to be involved in that. I think that's much more the miracles speaking for themselves. And maybe in that situation, the miracles don't have to validate anything particular. Fatima seems to be a large public event, which requires more of an answer, just because there were so many people seeing something strange. But Lourdes does seem to be, something that still continues healing people to this day. And that seems to be, from what I've seen anyways, that's not just Catholics. There's lots of people that go there. So I guess regardless of the source of whatever happened at Lourdes, for me, the fact that it's still healing today is a sign that something was from God there.
Absolutely. And it just made me think of an idea of, what if there are different levels of miracles, in the regard that before Jesus started doing miracles, in Jerusalem, there was a pool that was it the first person in the pool that day that was prayed over by the priest was cured.
It's Siloam, yeah.
So I think there was a degree of faith and works that equated to locations that would get you healed. Again, it was God. And then Jesus came in, and I think that's what radicalized, like everyone was like awestruck by him, because again, they knew miracles were a fact, but it came from God. So if this person was doing miracles, he had to be God, as well as the fact that, Christ was God, but claimed to be God as well. So maybe there are two kinds of miracles in the sense.
Okay.
They still derive from God and the Trinity, but if that's the case, then there may be a perspective that a lot of these miracles that the Catholics claim, regardless of who they give credit to, just say it's the Catholic Church that has control the narrative, and I'm not saying they're manipulating it, but it happened to a Catholic, or it happened to a priest. What if, to a degree, it's just a different kind of miracle, kind of less about the extravagance and more about the commitment and the faith to that specific location. I want to be very careful on how I say that. But again,
sometimes it almost sounds like you get into ideas of animism, where you can have almost like magical properties in a certain area through spiritual means. Is that kind of what you're getting at, or something?
Yeah, exactly. Like the presence, being in the presence of the Ark of the Covenant clearly is an unrefutable fact.
Okay.
If you touched it, you died.
Yeah.
Who knows what would happen in today? Like if it was found, I think if someone died and like today they found it and they died, I think it'd be like, okay, well, that's an absolute certainty that it still remains to be have the essence of the Lord with it, because it was his, it was where he connected to the earth before Christ. So I think there's evidence to state that.
Yeah, I think I can see that. As Paul says, for there are indeed many gods and many lords, yet for us there's one God. Um, because in what Paul would have been referring to is like a lot of, the Greek ideas of like lesser spiritual beings. I think that the spiritual world is much more diverse than most Christians um, give credit for. Michael Heiser is actually a good resource on this. He's an academic. I think he's a professor, but he's written a couple books anyways, um, on kind of bringing moderns up to speed on the ancient view of the world, because they definitely believed in hierarchies of angels and demons that were very active in the world. So it kind of in the sense that it may be a little bit more difficult to pin down, was this just God or just Satan? Because there does appear to be quite a few personalities in the world.
True. I've always considered to a degree that a lot of the ancient deities um weren't specifically the devil, but what if they were, one of his companions, a demon?
Hmm.
Because it is said that like in the book of Enoch and so that, and like the angels came down and gave information to mankind, like medicine supposedly and
Right,
witchcraft.
right.
So I don't think it would be um counterintuitive to say that maybe because those angels, now demons, were around to our understanding during creation, they may have an understanding of what, like, how God does it or what God did more than we could ever imagine. And so what if they actually do, to a degree, have understanding of the natural environment and control of, again, like, if you drink not or if you drink water, you're well hydrated, there's health benefits. So they may be able to manipulate to a small degree the natural environment that already is there, or not even manipulate it, just, again, without us knowing, you eat this fruit, eat this and you'll be cured. So that could explain certain degrees of miracles that actually aren't divine, if that makes
Yeah,
any kind of sense.
yeah. Well, I mean, again, even the magicians of Pharaoh
Right.
were able to perform something magical, apparently. I think that there's a lot of weird stuff out there. I'll leave it at that. And I definitely I don't look for anything outside of Jesus Christ and the Holy Spirit for their activity in this world. But I believe that there are a lot of spirits out there that are willing to offer something to the people who are reaching out.
Exactly. I mean, if in the sense the demons are trying to boost their numbers because they all know where they're going, I guess they do. Do they? I guess they do. That's a whole different argument about
Do they
when the
know?
angels fell. Do they know their true ending until the Bible? Like before then, do they just kind of figuring it out? But that's a different argument for a different day. Because they're not divine, they don't have omnipotence, so they wouldn't know the ending. Anyways, I would say their goal is to increase their numbers to pull people from the Lord. So with that, I feel like they, to a degree, would play the same game and have to have proof of some power in order to have people like follow them. You wouldn't just believe someone if they were saying something unless they could show you some kind of proof, even if it was just, smokes and mirrors.
Very
So I
good.
think our perspective of smoke and mirrors may not be the same that the demons have in their warehouse, if that makes sense.
Okay, their bag of tricks.
Bag of tricks. They may have more access to more tricks that we would actually consider supernatural, but in the realm of God, they're again just merely smokes and mirror. I think it's all about perspective.
Okay. Well, we're coming up on an hour and 20 minutes here, so probably good time to, because I think that's about all that I had to cover, just these two instances. Was there anything else that you wanted to say here on these before we end the
Um,
recording?
no, I think, I mean, I covered my perspective. Again, I just think we have to be cautious of, again, who we give credit to and whose credit being given when it comes to miracles. But I also would be very cautious to discredit every miracle you hear of, because if you discredit everything because it didn't happen to you, then again, I think you're discrediting God's ability.
All right, sounds good. I will end it here.